So I've talked about what sex scenes, can be in other novels, what they can look like. I've given you two examples already in might be a previous clip. I don't know if I've included it here. But I've given you two examples so far of, how sex scenes could arise and when writers might feel, or when authors, whatever, I might use them interchangeably, but whatever you might feel, is tough. You don't want to broach the subject with too much eroticism, but at the same time, you still have to address it. I want to also talk about the personal reasons why sex scenes might be uncomfortable for many of us. These are the I think issues that don't get raised often, particularly amongst us authors, just because it's very uncomfortable to talk about. But, when you think about writing a sex scene, you also have to acknowledge the place that you're coming from. Not everybody is sexually open. Not all of us have the best or most impeccable of sex lives. A lot of us have, a sexual history that's marred by some trauma. I talk about it on a spectrum when I talk about trauma. So on one hand, it could just be, not having a lover that is attentive, or one that just doesn't fit your sexual needs, where on the other spectrum, it could be a lot more darker, where there is sexual abuse. It could have started at a young age, and ever since then, it's just had a very negative effect on your sex life. And to me, to live as a holistic being, or to live happily, you have to have a very holistic way of thinking. So for me, sex, when you talk about sex life, it isn't separate from everything else. I don't think it should be. It just ends up that ends up being the bad or the toxic element, and that could seep in to, your work life. And in this case, your work is your writing. So you might find that that because you've had a bad sex life, or because you've had this trauma in the past, like I said, trauma being used as a spectrum, you might find yourself, having a hard time addressing sexual topics in a book. And I think that it's even harder in our society to do that. I've had an experience, or I've had many experiences, because I've made a career out of sex. So for me, there is this comfort to it. This might sound as discomfort. There is a comfort. I feel comfortable talking about it in a way that other people might not. Not just because of me being an active participant, but a lot of the time I was the one listening to other people's sexual fantasies. So I was the one kind of having to take everything in. And the majority of those people have been men. So to me, that definitely has an impact on the way that I write my sex scenes. A lot of I've written erotica, I've self-published it. It's okay. I need to go back and edit it. It's one of those things where it's really well done, but, it could be better. And I will totally admit that. But that said, the men read it. Like I had male readers who loved it. They loved the sex scenes. And then I had female readers who were just like, that's not realistic, So it's funny, it's funny to me that because of the experiences, and it's just an example, like I said, what's going on in terms of your approach to sex is it can have a direct effect on how you write it and which readers, respond to it. So for me, because I think I've been around men who've talked to me about their fantasies, and I've listened and taken it all in a very non-judgmental manner. Because of that, I think it ultimately affected the type of writers that I was, appealing to for my erotica. If you're having trouble writing a sex scene, you can always contact people who are more sexually open. It's not unheard of that authors have contacted sex workers, they've contacted other men or spoke to men who might be a little bit more sexual, they've spoken to other women who might be a little bit more sexual and have stories to tell. Just remember that when you're doing it, you don't want, and this will, again, when we talk about sex, it's very easy to forget this, you don't want to talk just about the what happened. I think when you start to ask the right questions, you'll get the answers that are most honest. So that's something to think about when you're approaching sex scenes and you just need a little bit more help because you're not comfortable writing them on your own. When you're talking to somebody else about them, talk about the story that you're trying to tell. Talk about the emotions that your characters are going through. Again, this is really a requirement, this really requires you to know your character inside out. It's totally okay if you're not. Again, there are going to be a lot of topics that you're going to want to try to approach in your story, and it doesn't have to just be sex, it could be other things. And doing so, you want to make sure that you have all the resources that you need in order to do it properly. So that's just some of the ways that you can do it.